Hello. Hello, my name is Alex Alexandru, and I'm one of the organisers of the 2021 Leadership for Professional Learning Symposium, co-organised by the journal Professional Development in Education. The focus of this year's event is leadership within technology-enhanced professional learning spaces, and we are carrying out short interviews with a number of authors whose articles have recently been published in PDIE. These interviews will be part of the resource base for the symposium, and recordings will be available generally on the LFPL and journal websites. Details of these will be made available at the end of this interview. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Jeffrey Carpenter from Elon University in the United States of America, who is the co-author of the article Exploring the Landscape of Educator Professional Activity on Twitter, an analysis of 16 education-related Twitter hashtags. And this article was written along with Tanya Tani, Scott Morrison, and Julia Keane. Welcome, Jeffrey. We selected your article because it aligns with three of the key themes of our symposium: leadership, professional learning, and technology-enhanced professional learning spaces. Firstly, could you please tell us about your article, particularly the motivation behind it?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about this research and represent the work done with my colleagues. Couldn't have done this paper without them, but yeah, so I've done prior work on teachers' perceptions of Twitter and actually published an article in PDIE previously, engagement through microblogging. So that was an article back in 2015, and that was teachers' sort of perspectives and stories about how they'd use Twitter. And so had taken that angle on educators' use of Twitter. And I happened to be in a conversation with folks from Participate, which is a for-profit education business in the US. They do professional learning work, and we were talking about a different project, and we ended up just sort of sidebarring about all the Twitter data they had. They used to have an app that was meant to support Twitter chat participation, and they were kind enough to say, well, yeah, we could do some stuff with all that data. And so we partnered with Tanya and Julie, who are from Participate, and then my colleague Scott Morrison. And so we all had this sort of intuitive sense that Twitter was not this big monolithic space, but that Twitter hashtags sort of played host to different cultures, different types of spaces. And so we saw this massive data set that Participate had as an opportunity to compare the different kind of spaces that exist on Twitter. So we had two research questions. One was where we looked at 16 hashtags, all sort of we put all those tweets from 16 hashtags into a blender and kind of looked at them together as one big mass. And then we also separated them out and compared and contrasted them individually. And then we were looking at 13 months of data, sort of doing monthly slices. And so we were also looking at change over time. And sort of the big picture takeaway would be that Twitter hashtags, first of all, they're not monolithic. So education Twitter is not a single space. There's multiple spaces and cultures within Twitter that educators can access that look very different. And then also another big takeaway would be that education Twitter is not static. So it changes, it evolves. There's an ebb and a flow to the different hashtag spaces. So some spaces just disappear, hashtags go out of use. Others evolve, others devolve. So it's neither monolithic nor static in terms of what's there. So what that means is that educators can have really different user experiences of Twitter, depending on which hashtags or which combination of hashtags they access. And so, some teachers are using Twitter in ways that are about conversation and community and dialogue. Other teachers might be focused more on sort of getting information and resources. Others might be focused on promoting themselves and resources that they're creating. And so the spaces are very different, which means it supports a variety of different kinds of uses by teachers.
Thank you for that really informative answer. And it leads me on nicely into the next question that I'd like to ask. And I like the fact that you see Twitter hashtags, particularly being very fluid, because I'd like to know from you what new models of professional learning that we might need to ensure that education professionals are not just keeping up, which you sort of alluded to in your first answer, with the creative use of technologies, but are ahead of the curve.
Yeah, so it's interesting to think of sort of how the word models is relevant to Twitter. So model kind of implies structure in a way that Twitter and social media can be a bit chaotic. And so sometimes the idea of a model and professional learning on social media doesn't feel like a perfect fit to me. But I understand the question. I was on the journal website today, and I saw that a new special issue has come out recently on sort of these non-linear perspectives on teacher development. And so I think that might also be a helpful way to think about sort of social media use for professional learning. Is it's going to be non-linear. So any sort of attempt to think about it in terms of models, we probably have to acknowledge that it wouldn't be a linear model of professional learning. So I think, social media learning, professional learning on social media, we have to look beyond sort of the formal and the required. So a lot of professional development research is on more formal professional development and mandated or required professional learning. And there is some professional learning on Twitter that is perhaps mandated or more formalized, but a lot of it is self-initiated and independent, voluntary. And so I think the sort of what you see in the approach to social media and how teachers use Twitter that might transfer to other models is, teachers have very unique needs and interests. Their work is very contextual. Teachers are hopefully developing over the course of their career. And so people at different stages are going to have different needs. And so sort of one size fits all professional learning struggles to meet those different needs. And so I think, technology is a place, Twitter Spaces are places perhaps where teachers can go and sort of plug in to opportunities that match up with where they currently are. So ahead of the curve might mean different things for different folks. I think, for some folks, probably keeping up is good enough. It reminds me of the Garrison Keillor, this American humorist who talks about this mythical town of Lake Wobegon, where all the children are above average, right? So all the children can't be above average. In the same way, like all educators can't be ahead of the curve, or that just doesn't compute. That would move the curve if everyone got ahead of it. But I think in terms of sort of social media use, and when I think of being ahead of the curve right now, I think some issues that are sort of at the forefront that teachers need to be thinking about in engaging with technology are the ethics, the privacy, data privacy stuff is big and something that teachers need to be thinking more about. And if we're just sort of trying to keep up, we may be not worrying about those things as much as we should. And I think there's been really interesting work done by Taras and his colleagues. I believe they're in Finland, talking about sort of avoiding technology solutionism, which is the idea that sort of every problem has a technology solution. And so I think in education, some problems, yeah, maybe they do have a technology solution, but we can't get stuck in this mindset of everything has a technology solution, because education is a very human endeavor, and some stuff is not going to get solved by Twitter hashtag spaces, for example.
Once again, thanks a lot for that really insightful answer, Jeffrey. And again, I'd like to pick up on two of the issues you raised in that, which is different teachers have different needs at different times, and the informal and formal aspects of professional development via social media channels such as Twitter. So how would you say are these technologies encouraging professional dialogue, critical reflection, thoughtful communication, and building communities? And are there times when they act as barriers to engagement for some people or groups? And I think you've sort of touched upon this in the article as well.
Yeah, so I was a high school English teacher. And so for the beginning years of my career, I mainly just interacted with my English department at the high school that I taught at. So it was 12 other teachers. And then I started to have a little interaction with the official professional association or National Council of Teachers of English. So my access to sort of people and ideas was those local people, and then a little bit interface with my professional association. In the US alone, there's more than 3 million teachers, so why am I limiting myself to just interacting with that small group of teachers who happen to be in the same school with me? So I think that the thing that really technology does potentially well is give teachers access to more ideas and more people. What they do with that access is up to them and varies perhaps. But this idea of more people, more ideas, easier access to them, I think is the big benefit. And then folks can choose to sort of use that to communicate. They can choose it to build communities. They can construct sort of professional learning networks that really push them to be critical and reflect more on their practice. So what teachers do with that access does vary. In terms of some of the barriers, there are many. So I don't want to seem like I'm advertising for Twitter or any particular technology. I want to acknowledge there are a lot of barriers out there. I do think that if we sort of waited around for the perfect educational technology to host professional learning, we'd be waiting forever. So we'd probably have to work with these imperfect spaces and platforms. Some of the barriers that we came across in the study, though, one is there's this idea called the 80-20 principle, that 20% of the users produce 80% of the content in a lot of online spaces. And so you have these super users who sort of dominate discourse and production. And maybe some of those super users are really good and it's really helpful what they produce. And then others, who knows whether they deserve sort of that degree of attention and that space in the platforms. And so we saw that in all 16 of the hashtags, that there was a pretty heavy emphasis on super users. It did vary some. So there are a couple of the hashtags where the top 5% of users were producing over 80% of the content. And then there were others where the top 5% were producing 50 or 60% of the content. But yeah, these big super users can be a bit of a barrier to others feeling like they can contribute. Spam is rife in some Twitter spaces more than others. And that can be a barrier. Some people just sort of ignore the spam and others find it frustrating. The Goldilocks concept of sort of finding the space that is just the right fit for you, I think is important to think about. Some people find the hashtags that really meet their needs, but we sort of wonder, there's not really an easy way or a guarantee that all teachers are going to find the hashtags that best align with their needs. And so some educators, there might be a great hashtag space out there for them, and they just never stumble upon it or have it recommended to them. And then finally, social media is well known for sort of, there's misogyny, there's cyber violence, there's trolls, there's racism, and the teacher spaces do feature some of that as well. And that can be certainly a barrier.
Thanks for that, Jeffrey. And I really want to pick up on those last 2 points about the super users and, the negative aspects, the barriers there, because not only in this article, but the previous article that you wrote around Twitter used by teachers. A key point for us is, how do you believe educators are exercising agency and actively shaping their opportunities for professional learning and collaboration?
Yeah, and I think that's really a key takeaway, is this idea of agency, and it's why maybe teachers are voluntarily spending a lot of time on Twitter, is because I think they often don't experience enough agency in their other professional learning settings. And so then when they get on social media and they find there are opportunities for them to drive their own professional learning, they really value that. Twitter, I heard it described early on as a gateway drug for other forms of self-initiated learning. And so it's not really about Twitter, it's about exercising agency in your professional learning. And Twitter allows folks to do that. Sometimes they start on Twitter, they develop some connections, and then they move to other platforms or find other Twitter spaces. It's really this idea of sort of going where you grow, finding those spaces. An interesting thing around agency that I think teachers could perhaps do a little bit more with is sort of taking professional learning to the next level of actually collaborating with other teachers beyond just discussion. So Huberman back in the 90s said that education teachers sort of are guilty of this discussion culture where they talk amongst each other, talk with each other a lot about ideas at sort of a vague level, but then don't actually make changes in their practice. And I think that social media may kind of reflect that. A lot of talk. Do we know how much actual action or change happens? And so I think that's the area for growth, where teachers can maybe do more of sort of leveraging the new access to people and ideas to actually initiate projects and make change in their teaching. There's room in there for sort of activism, I think. Right now in the US, we're seeing a lot of pushback against teachers talking more about racism and social justice issues in their classroom. And I want to see the pushback to the pushback, right? So social media would be a way for teachers to organize and push back against some of the legislation that's happening in US states right now that's trying to ban teachers from talking about, the fact that there is racism, systemic racism baked into a lot of the structures and laws of our country.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And I really like that aspect of using the pushback to push back again. I think that is quite key, but it also enhances the points you made about the positive use of Twitter from a professional learning and development perspective, but also from a social justice perspective, which you really nicely put out there for us. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, Jeffrey. Thank you for your informative and insightful answers. And I'm not only looking forward to reading your next article, but I've got a feeling that your most recent article that we've spoken about today will become, like your first article, one of the most read PDIE articles out there. So thank you very much for today.
You're welcome. And I enjoyed the conversation, Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.